Welcome to Construct Tech TV. I am Peggy Smedley. The name Chattanooga comes from the Creek Indian word for rock coming to a point. Now this refers to Lookout Mountain, which begins in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and stretches through Alabama and Georgia. Because of its location, the city was often a battleground during the Civil War. With Chattanooga's river and rail systems, it was considered the gateway to the Deep South. Now let's talk about railways just for a minute here. The city has a very rich history with trains that dates back before the Civil War even began. In 1895, the South unveiled the world's steepest passenger railway. The train was powered by two 100-horsepower engines and a pulley system. Now, the two cars operating simultaneously pull each other up and down the mountain on a single track. The railways served as a connector to some of America's biggest cities. From 1909 to 1970, all trains traveling southward passed through the city's famous terminal station on the Chattanooga Choo-Choo. Some of you might remember the famous 1941 song by the very same name. While trains are still an iconic part of the city, today the town has its eyes set on another form of infrastructure and transportation, roadways, with a specific focus on connected and autonomous vehicles, which we will explore more in depth throughout this entire show. Today, Chattanooga is the fourth largest city in the state. The city has zero-emission electric buses. Sustainability in general is a key concept for the city. Industry and government work together for city development, and you will see just how important collaboration is to the city as we talk with city officials who work with its citizens and businesses to make it all happen. That's a city connected, Chattanooga. As most of you know, smartphone apps are really on the rise. And they're also impacting the way work is performed on our construction job sites. But here's my question for you. Are they really safe? That's what we're going to talk about on the show today. So with me is Carl Heinlein. He's the Safety Senior Consultant at the American Contractors Insurance Group and the Director at Large at the American Society of Safety Engineers. Carl, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
You know, you're like my partner in crime here on all these discussions.
Very important discussions.
And you know what? So let's talk about it. We see all of these apps now, and everyone's talking about the importance of them. But my first question, are they becoming a distraction to what's really helping at the job site, or are they really a valuable tool?
Well, that is a great question because, you know, it seems like about every week there's a new app that comes out that's something construction related.
So like there's an app for that?
Sure. There's an app for all your apps. There's probably an app for all your apps. But, you know, the biggest thing that what we're seeing out with the cell phones is distraction. Distracted walking, distracted driving. So there's pros and certainly cons with technology. And we're seeing both sides right now.
So when we say this, we want these apps, but should they be used in the field right now? I mean, is there really a necessity for it? Because we talk about all this technology being used in all these big cranes. Now we're bringing smartphones into the cranes as well. I mean, now think about all these things you have to look at in there. Now you've got to think about what's happening around you. You've got drones. You've got all kinds of things. How does a worker be able to keep control and being able to be safe at the same time? Now we talk about fatigue. We're talking about all these things happening at the same time. Are we being able to manage what's going on around us with all this technology?
Well, it starts even before the cell phone. So within construction companies, what we're starting to see is no phones allowed on the job. So no phones allowed on the job.
That's like in the office, people are saying, you know, those, because sometimes you think, are people doing things, are they getting calls from their personal family? Are they looking at social media, Twitter accounts and things like that? But how does that change that? Because there are apps that are for project management and things like that, getting deliveries. If you say that, how does that change the dynamic of how technology has really changed what we do at the job site, if you say that? Is that really going to create more havoc than it does by saying no, smartphones, no apps, no anything on the job site?
Well, I think that as our millennials and folks that are very interested in technology continue to expand within our construction companies and projects, it really starts with the company culture. You know, what is technology going to do for us? How are we going to utilize it? When are we going to utilize it? And really, what are the apps that we're going to use? But really, we have to have some sort of controls on who has cell phones on our projects, because they can be a big distractor and create risks on the projects.
So if we say no smartphones on the job site, is there any apps then that you would recommend? Because if you say none, then I guess there's no apps you're going to recommend either. So it's a catch-22 right there.
It is. So again, comes to the company culture. Instead of just getting rid of everything, what are we going to utilize them for? What are going to be the benefits? Who's going to use them? So there's a number of great apps out there for hearing for noise or chemicals or ladder angles. So there's a lot of great apps out there, but we have to have some really some rules in place to make sure it's just not over the place, because again, sometimes technology's the pros, or you also can have the cons. So the culture.
How do we get companies and employees to know when they have to be aware of that culture? I mean, again, does it go back to that training that we're always saying, training, training, training? You know, we always say location, location, location. I say that all the time here. But do you create that culture that's repetition again, because you constantly bring in new employees? Do you have to then have these classes and say, here, we have to remind everybody about what we're doing, how we're doing it? Is that what has to be done on a regular? Is there somebody that has to be in charge of all of this, that manages it so that the company knows it, the insurance company knows it? It's kind of a three-pronged kind of approach?
3, 4, 7, 17. I was with a contractor the other day. They have 17 different operating systems. So technology's all over the place. But really, I think it comes with, when, again, onboarding the employees. You know, we have a number of folks that have not been in this industry before. So I think it starts with day one, and then consistent enforcement out there. We can certainly utilize these apps as a positive for the job. It just has to, when we start with people coming onto the project, what are we going to use them for? Who's going to use them and when? So that's the importance.
When we look down the road to all of this right now and we say, here's what the construction industry is going to be right now, is there something that you see that has changed the industry that is now for the good? I mean, that it says they can't live without, because we know the iPhone changed us and our lives are never going to be the same. Are you seeing that right now with any technology that you say, we're never, like drones? We say drones are taking us so we don't have to go in areas that we never had to before, in risky areas. We can fly a drone, the human doesn't have to go. Are there things like apps that we have that are making that possible, that we say we're going to have that?
I think that everyone should be taking a look at some of the education apps out there. You know, apps now are utilizing colors and graphics, so it makes it much easier for our construction population. In a lot of cases is really bilingual, in some cases trilingual. So apps are utilizing gaming type of technology, colors, figurine type of things that really workers understand, regardless of their education level and their language. So I think that you're going to see a lot of gamification in the apps moving forward.
So it's interesting. So I think, Carl, it's interesting that we see where the smart apps are coming, what they're doing, and it's great to see that if we use this and we have a culture at the job site for it, that we can actually be smart at the way we use these. Carl, I've enjoyed having you. Thank you so much for spending time with us here.
Always great being here. Thank you.
All right. Well, now we have Carl Heinlein. He's the Senior Safety Consultant at the American Contractors Insurance Group and the Director at Large for the American Society of Safety Engineers. And that's your Safety Zone for today. Transportation systems are progressing. Now, this includes road scanning and traffic control systems. And all of this is coming at the same time as the emergence of connected autonomous vehicles. So now think about this. The good news is that cities are really responding. And what's really exciting is we've had this great opportunity to talk to the city of Chattanooga, which is looking to address the aging infrastructure. So here to chat with me all about it today is the Smart City Director for the city of Chattanooga. Now, Kevin Comstock's specialties include project management, strategic planning, and collaborative team building. So please join me in welcoming Kevin Comstock to the show. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So Kevin, let's talk about it. You know, in Chattanooga, you guys have been doing a lot of amazing things. In your definition, what makes really a smart city, or a city smart, I should say?
Well, Peggy, to be honest, we have a lot of infrastructure that's in place. We have a power board that's put in the gig fiber network. It was the first one in the country. And with that, we've been using it to leverage other types of technology here in the city. We've installed a traffic signal system that we can communicate with and monitor and maintain. And it helps us to make better, more data-driven decisions in helping us provide our services better to our citizens.
So do you think that it's all about the data? Because we always talk about, when we teach in the Internet of Things, or we're teaching the construction industry, we say it's all about, it used to be location, location, location. Now we say it's about data, data, data. Is the key to a smart city really having access to really good information, or the data, to make those real-time decisions?
Well, data is, you know, kind of in our industry, we're saying right now that data is the new currency. It is a tangible item. Universities are using it, agencies are using it, and pretty much all of our decision making is based on that. Citizens require data for some of their information about how they commute, or how their mobility works in the city, some of the services that they want provided. Every bit of this is data driven. We use the data also in studying various things. So if we want to understand something more, we have a local university here that we work with that does quite a bit of urban analytics on the data that we have, and is always looking for new sources of data. So yes.
So let's talk about that. When we talk about having information now, but how do you get that information, or how do you work with it when you're dealing with an aging infrastructure? Because we all know, we've even heard the president talk about that, but all of our cities are dealing with an aging infrastructure. How do you make that work with all this new data that we talk about?
A lot of what we do, like, you know, I mentioned our traffic signal system earlier. I mean, traffic signals have been around for quite a long time. The particulars of what we have here are basically 5 years old at this point in time, but they still have valuable information that we can get from that, and there's still things that we can do with that system to help manage it and make it better. There are other technologies that you know, from CAD or GIS that are helping with some of the infrastructure decisions that, you know, we can study certain things, we can look at certain things, figure out what use cases are, what the mobility needs are, and figure out, okay, how do we target which ones really need to be done first, or in some sort of prioritization scenario. There's just so many aspects to the data that, you know, you're pretty much just open to whatever we can, you know, come up with.
But that's an interesting point, because right now, if you're using the data to help you figure out what parts of that infrastructure need most important repair, are you actually using that right now? Because that's critical, because we all know we all have that aging infrastructure, and if we don't address it, it's going to be something happens critically to our water. It could be a huge disaster for a certain part of the city.
Well, you know, some of the data sources that kind of come from places like the USGS, which monitors river height and whatnot. So if we know that there's been, you know, several floods in the last few years, then we know that perhaps the structural integrity of a certain bridge may be lessened to some degree over time. If we know by our projections from land use and what development's going to occur, what kind of traffic is going to be out there, and what the need of that bridge is going to be, projecting out 5, 10, 15 years into the future, then we can begin to make better decisions on how to plan for the replacement of that structure.
Is that also going to play a role as you talk about your traffic signals? So if you have these infrastructures that are connected, you have the underground, we're talking about infrastructures that are connected. How are these all going to change when we start seeing things where autonomous vehicles come into play? Because that's all has to be connected in some ways, right? I mean, we can't have these connected cars without playing a role to our connected infrastructure, right?
Well, you bring up a very important part that I think a lot of people kind of miss in this discussion, is that in order to get to autonomous vehicles, we have to have connected vehicles first. Right now, we have a couple of vendors out there that are indicating that they have an autonomous vehicle of sorts that is self-driving and can manage the environment that it's placed in because of all the sensors on that vehicle. It does not communicate with other vehicles. It does not communicate with the infrastructure. So most of the work that we're doing here in Chattanooga is starting to develop those technologies and have those types of infrastructure in place. There's been a lot of discussion about the dedicated short-range radio communications between the infrastructure, traffic signals or whatever, and vehicles. There's a lot of vehicle-to-vehicle type of infrastructure that needs to be in place. So we have to go through that step first. And so, autonomous vehicles are in the future, but I think they're more distant future.
So there's a lot more that has to be done when we talk about these smart cities, we talk about our autonomous vehicles, we talk about our infrastructure. We have to build it before, we can't just run. All of these things have to be built together before we can really see it. So where are we talking about 5, 10, 15 years down the road when we're looking at all this technology?
Well, I think you're going to start to see some really quantum leaps in technologies in the next 5 years. The ability for traffic signals to be able to communicate with some vehicles. We're seeing that now with a couple of manufacturers over in Europe, where the signal system can communicate how long it's going to be before the green light comes up, or how much longer or what speed they need to go through to miss the red. So those types of technologies are currently in place. We have the ability to do those things, but we just haven't deployed them on a bigger scale yet. I think as those things get tested in the near future, you're going to start seeing that stuff actively on the market in the next 5 years. 10 years, no telling. We're going to be able to have the vehicles communicating with each other. And I think maybe in 25 years that we would really begin to see a full embedding of autonomous type vehicles or fully integrated vehicles within our network. That's including buses and transit vehicles, situational understanding where bicyclists and pedestrians are. There's a lot of things that we have to think about in that space.
Well, it's really interesting that you're sharing all this with us, Kevin. I appreciate it. So Kevin Comstock, you're the Smart City Director for the City of Chattanooga. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Anytime, Peggy.
All right, well, there you have it. That's someone you should know. Chattanooga is proud its community is quickly building a hotbed of innovation for startups and so much more. The Enterprise Center is helping to contribute to this. This is a nonprofit organization with a local board of directors. It serves to leverage digital technology to create, demonstrate, test, and apply solutions for the 21st century. Here to chat with me is Ken Hayes, president of the Enterprise Center. Ken, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Ken, I'm really excited. One of the things when I was in Chattanooga, it was exciting to see all the great technology that you'd been doing. But I'm curious, how has things changed since you guys implemented the gig?
It changes every day. I think as you probably heard when you were in Chattanooga down here or read, if you go back to 2010, you would never hear entrepreneurial ecosystem in our branding. You never hear technology. And two big things happened in 2010 is CoLab, which is our public-private accelerator, formed in September of 2010. And Chattanooga EPB announced that we had, we were really the first gig city. And so I think what we've seen is that we've continually been building up enthusiasm. The ecosystem gets stronger, more and more folks come, and we're starting to have more successes.
Let's talk about the economic impact, because there have been things that you've built. There's new companies that are coming in, new startups. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we were real pleased. There was a new Brookings Institution report that came out 2 weeks ago and we were mentioned in the Financial Times, that our job growth, was 15.6% for our young companies from 2015 to 2016, and that we were one of the six biggest metro area growths. Or we were the sixth most rapid, metro areas in growth. Now that for us, it's still, we're still sort of in an infancy stage, so those numbers aren't huge. But what we saw in the last economic impact study that was done on the fiber and sort of the entrepreneurial ecosystem is that since the launch of the gig, that there was somewhere between that were attributable to that gigabit technology, somewhere between 2,800 and 5,200 jobs that were created, with a sort of a net positive income of about $860 to $1.3 million. It's real hard, in these new metrics to sort of define exactly, where the jobs are coming from. Clearly, the gigabit technology has been a huge tool in our toolbox in attracting, both legacy companies and entrepreneurs. But so we know it's happening, and we know the numbers are positive, and I think we're going to get smarter and smarter as we go along. And I think the other big thing is if you look back in 2010, 2011, one of the biggest complaints that people had was that we had no investors, we had no funders, and so we've got sort of 3 or 4 funds that have sort of been created. I think that the total of just the funds amounts to about $62 million, but then the investments that they make attract other investments. So, and again, that grows every year. So the trends are right, the enthusiasm's right, and we're proud to be Chattanooga.
Let's talk about what's happening with the schools, because I think one of the things we talk about innovation is important about getting the schools excited. That brings the young startups. There's a combination of really exciting things that are happening. How do you see all that?
Well, what we've got is Enterprise Center, which is what I have the pleasure of running today. Has sort of 3 strategic goals, and one is the innovation district creation, one is research and application development, and one is digital equity. And in our digital equity area and research and applications is that some of the new sort of gigabit apps that are being created here, we actually are testing, and they become education focused. We have a partnership with the University of Southern Cal, the Annenberg Innovation Lab, and we've worked together to create a 4K microscope where kids in the inner city schools are the only kids in the world that are seeing this most advanced teleeducation application, where a 4K microscope used to sit in LA and the kids manipulated it here in Chattanooga, and it's sort of project-based learning. We've also we do live streaming from our aquarium, so you can see alligators and jellyfish, and the kid and teachers are teaching curriculum around this live 4K streaming, which again is not being done. We've got the mayor of Lafayette, Louisiana, coming in next week. We're doing actually a gigabit city to gigabit city deal with 4K streaming. We're streaming alligators from the aquarium. They're going to be streaming live alligators from the bayous here.
As long as you're just streaming them, Ken. Nobody wants to see them on the streets. You're just streaming them, right?
So far they're all staying in the gigabit technology. They haven't jumped out yet. Yeah.
Well, that's what's great about all of this, because when I was there and you have that 12-mile Riverwalk that's absolutely magnificent, what you're doing, though, is opening up opportunities for all kinds of jobs, is what you're saying. You're educating, it's jobs, it's new startups. But I think the exciting part of this is you're showing a new realm of technology and innovation of what has to be created in new cities, making cities smart. Is that the exciting thing? Showing the gig is making things faster, smarter, and you're working with utilities and partners. All kinds of things are making it happen. Isn't that the real story here?
The real story is that in this day and age, if you're not dealing with technology and you're not becoming a smart city, you're going to be left behind. And I think what we've learned and what we're striving to is to make this a entrepreneurial and innovative city where everybody gets involved. It's not just the young techies, but it's the kids, it's the folks, it's the seniors. That maybe don't use that. So it's, our ecosystem is growing, and it's not just growing with technology. These young, unbelievably wickedly smart folks that are coming. We're trying to sort of make that for all people.
Well, Ken, I've really enjoyed spending time with you, and I appreciate it. Ken Hayes, the president of Enterprise Center, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. All
right, well, that's our Innovation in Tech. Underground infrastructure is critical to cities. Today, structural sensing, monitoring, and prognosis is all essential in developing smart cities. Here to chat with me is Dryver Huston, Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Vermont. He has 30 years of experience in developing and implementing systems for measuring and controlling the state of structural and mechanical systems. Dryver, welcome to the show.
Hello.
So let's talk about it. You really have done a lot of work on the underground infrastructure. Help us understand what really has been done when we look about technology and upgrades to the underground infrastructure. How important is that right now when we look at all the things that we're even talking about, what the president talks about, of needing to update and improve our infrastructure?
Well, particularly in cities, the underground infrastructure is really the lifeblood. It carries the water, gas, electricity. Even back in the ancient cities, some found Ephesus and Turkey had sewers, the Roman cities. But now the modern city, there's lots of stuff under the city, and the city just wouldn't function without it. Most of it was put in a long time ago. It was built in as the city grew. And it's aging, but out of sight and unknown. It's also a key factor in the growth and vitality of cities as they move forward.
And so when we talk about this underground infrastructure that we're referencing, and you defined it as the water and things like this, and it's aging, are we talking about all infrastructures are going through this, and it's a problem in many cities or just a few cities?
Oh, I would say it's a problem worldwide. Different cities have different specific problems. Also included is in the larger cities, the tunnels and subways that are part of the underground infrastructure.
What needs to be done, would you say, to upgrade these infrastructures? Is it a costly kind of thing to upgrade? Are they minor improvements? What are we talking about when you reference that?
Oh, the upgrades can be very costly, particularly if you do them in the traditional method, which is to dig and excavate and completely replace. There's a variety of techniques that are becoming more popular that can fix them without the major excavation. Some of those, particularly the sewers, you can slip line them, put materials on the insides. There are robots that can go inside and do a lot of the work. Some of the pipes, though, are very aged, particularly the drinking water pipes, and they will need replaced. There's also lead pipes that are a big issue.
Well, we talk about lead pipes is a huge issue there, but then when we talk about repairing all these, it's great to hear that robots go down there because we see a lot of issues with that, but who's responsible for this? Because if it's costly in replacing these, sending robots, we're talking about the sophistication of robots is great, but the idea of sending robots down there is costly. So who's going to pay for all this?
Oh, yes. Who pays is a complicated question because there's multiple private and public owners of these utilities and spaces. And so, indeed, it's not simple who pays and where the money comes from. Water departments get their money from the ratepayers. Some of this is subsidized by tax money, sometimes not. Most of the gas companies are commercial, and ultimately the ratepayers for the utilities pay for it.
Let's talk about it, one city in particular. You did some work in Chattanooga, and they did some improvements there. Talk about that, so maybe we can hone in on some improvements, at least in one city.
Yes, Chattanooga is replacing some of the pipes. They're doing a gradual upgrade of the various infrastructure. Our particular role was rather narrow. We've been developing with the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, some new devices to map what's under the ground. Under the ground, it's out of sight. The owners of the infrastructure know approximately where it is, but where it is exactly is unknown. It was buried 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago. One way, 2 feet or the other is not obvious. So we have been developing some new instruments to map this underground infrastructure, and we did that down in Chattanooga
describe the mapping that you did, because that's a little bit of the sophistication. We're talking about technology, as new technology, to be able to do this. And how's the university involved in that?
Oh yes. The mapping brings multiple pieces together. One is the actual sensors to find the infrastructure under the ground. And we've been using mostly ground penetrating radar, but there's also magnetic and acoustic sensors as well. These are above ground instruments that roll along the ground to find things. The big technical question with that, aside from the sensing, is to know where you are, how to map where you and register your position within inches. And so we've been developing methods mostly based on smartphones to do that. There are other methods, but we've been developing some of these new methods. Combined with that are these large databases that have maps of the cities, GIS systems, and some of the infrastructures, that's geographical information systems, and some of the infrastructures also drawn out on building information modeling systems, BIM, although most of that is still essentially hand drawings.
So, Dryver, do you think, looking at this right now, if we're using some of the best technology, we're going to be able to see where we can best improve some of the infrastructure and where the greatest needs are for improving it or upgrading it?
Yes, and there's some really exciting possibilities for improving the visualization through augmented reality and virtual reality, and teams of people looking at augmented reality. So you get these three-dimensional images of what's under the city, both for planning and for maintenance and repair.
And when you look at that right now, and we look at the outlook, there's a lot of, I mean, we're going to have to do this into a lot of cities, Chattanooga being one. Do you see the outlook being really bright for using a lot of sophisticated technology for just even the infrastructure right now, underground infrastructure that we're talking about right now?
Oh, yes, I think because there's a real cost leverage. Indeed, these new technologies cost money, but the value and ability to do this construction at lower cost, quicker, will pay for itself. We already see this in some of these inspector robots for sewers. Those robots are now commercially available. Many cities have those. It's just you can't fit people down in the sewers all the time. And you can't dig holes just to see whether a pipe's leaking. And so there's all this technology that's going to make it a lot cheaper and less expensive to do this work.
Well, Dryver Huston, the Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Vermont, thank you so much for being with us. And we appreciate all your time today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
All right, well, that's our Learn It for today. Okay, today's word of the day is autonomous vehicles. Now, I was so impressed by my conversation with Kevin Comstock from the city of Chattanooga that I wanted to explore the concept even further on this segment. Now, you could say the concept of autonomous machines dates back as far as the 1860s. Now, this is when self-propelled torpedoes were first invented. Now, this is one of the earliest guidance systems, and it led to autopilots on airplanes, auto-tillers on sailboats, and even semi-autonomous military drones. Now, we've talked about that a lot, right? So today, we're going to be on what you could say is the precipice of having autonomous cars on all of our roads. But like anything else, construction companies, all of you, have to build the infrastructure to support all of this. Now, we all talk about that as well. So these vehicles will be capable of sensing the environment and even navigating their streets without any of us at the wheel. Now, autonomous vehicles direct their surroundings using a host of technologies such as LiDAR and radar and GPS, 360-degree camera systems, and even some of these nifty, powerful onboard processing computers. So today, the government is kind of directing the advancement of the autonomous vehicle movement. In fact, last September, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration released federal guidance for automated driving systems. And this governance supports the development of all of this technology. And it calls for industry and government and even the advocates to kind of work together to deploy automated vehicles and associated technologies. So this means the infrastructure needs to finally advance as well. And this comes as no surprise. In fact, I've been talking about it on my radio show for more than a year or so. And that means we need vehicle-to-infrastructure technology to help make all of this a reality. And that means it's time for the construction industry and all of you and us to get ready for it. So V2I is a critical component of the connected autonomous driving world. Now a system of hardware and software and firmware and wireless communication will enable the transfer of data between vehicles and the road infrastructure. And it all starts with what we're talking about, all the cities. It will take a truly connected town to help get this technology on all of our roads. Autonomous vehicles. Now that's your word, or I should say words, of the day. And thanks for watching Construct Tech TV, where we are talking tech at the job site.